Hello, and welcome to part 2 of this review. In part 1 of this review of the Naked Ape, the chapters on introduction, origin, sex, and child rearing were examined. This video will examine the book's latter chapters on exploration, fighting, feeding, comfort, and animals. The author begins the chapter on exploration by justifying a need for it. This is distilled down to the need to make every opportunity count for non-specialized animals, as opposed to the highly specialized species. Unlike the large herbivore, the defensive specialist or predator, the naked ape must also be prepared to defend itself and so explore its territory. Finally, that a need for opportunities has also given rise to a need for greater curiosity. The interesting observation is made that highly specialized species cannot cope with environmental changes. This is now seen at the growing restrictions on species such as the orangutan and reduced available habitats, the changing predators of the United States, example of the coy wolf. The ape is seen as the most opportunistic, and the naked ape the epitome of this. It is ascribed to the long duration of neoteny. The author attributes the great need for this curiosity and exploration as a driving factor in the artistic and creative behavior of children. The 6 rules they propose for the ape are as follows. 1. Investigate the unknown and make it known. 2. Impose a pattern on the familiar. 3. Vary this repetition until no more variation is possible. 4. Select the most satisfying variation and sacrifice all others. 5. Revise and combine these variations. 6. Do all of these for self-satisfaction. The author finally attempts to attribute the development of social skills to the purely behavioral and learned development of children, interacting and exploring the social environment. The interesting aspect here is the effect of a lack of social integration as children. Parental monkeys without childhood social experience were unable to rear children and saw them as parasitic organisms. However, prolonged special care could reduce the impact of this deficit. This chapter has 2 problems that are apparent. The first, the author has a hard time separating the role of exploration and child rearing, which have been discussed in an earlier chapter. The topics are constantly intermixed and interchanged, making it somewhat difficult to separate the exploring aspect out. Second, the author has made drastic claims that are wrong, although this has been for good reason. The technology required to understand the physiological, genetic, and developmental changes caused by or lacking in social interaction were not available until 30 years after the book was published. Particularly the changes in brain structure during infancy and through to early adolescence have been shown to be caused by genes in response to environmental stimuli, and they can develop and change over time. The author begins the next chapter on fighting by asking the reader to forgo the modern luxury of wholesale death by bomb, gun, or atomic, biological, and chemical weapon. The naked ape is said to be both territorial and hierarchical, the latter from the ape ancestors and the former the predator adaptation. The author spends a great deal of time leading up to a very simple explanation of the fight-or-flight complex. Although going into some detail, this explanation is a good setup for the following section on appeasement behavior. The naked ape is argued to have behaviors directly developed from the ape ancestors, bowing to avert eye contact, war dances to demonstrate preparedness for battle. An interesting but obsolete argument is made for appeasing police after being stopped for speeding, the gist of which is to quickly exit your vehicle and go to the police officer, so as to enter their territory as a supplicant, thereby appeasing them through these submissive gestures, without exacting a physical toll to them. With current state of international policing, it would likely end in an unpleasant trip to the emergency department with a bad case of bullets, or death. The author argues that the appeasement behavior cannot be observed and acted on with the development of modern technology, that being anything beyond a club. That without this behavior, the naked ape is not able to do aught but engage in wholesale death of its opponent. This led to cooperative killing and eventually military force. The author clearly states that they do not believe the naked ape developed these groups to kill, but to subjugate its rivals. Unfortunately, this clearly conflicts with the means and mechanisms of subjugation. War results in death, as they describe it due to the technology involved. Technology, as compared to the social structure, has outperformed the restrictions on the animal aspect of the naked ape. Oddly, the author incorporates religion into the chapter on fighting. This is simplified to a group of individuals gathering to appease a dominant figure, the figure providing an overarching regulation of behavior. Unfortunately, the author is not aware of discoveries in other apes. This includes the recently observed behavior of apes throwing rocks into a tree hollow in a ritualized and almost religious manner. The author briefly touches on the role of the home and territory in fighting. They argue that the home is an inherently isolated territory, that is distinct from the other territories and contains only one family. Examining the largest populations, this is contested. Countries like India commonly have multiple generations and families within one household. Cities like New York contain many indistinguishable apartments. These still epitomize the social behaviors of the naked ape as it is now. The author accounts for this by explaining the socially created rules which allow the naked ape to ignore the massive others and act as though they truly existed as a small tribe of only several hundred. Behaviors such as non-contact, inclination and lack of eye contact in daily activities, and less directly engaged with individuals. The population and Western-focused aspects of this book appear to be rather weak overall. It would seem on the surface that food is so far removed from either the ape or predator that evaluation is impossible. It seems the author takes the idea of feeding to incorporate the process of earning an income, equilibrating the two as being equal. The book ages with references to a mostly male working population, but does give some credence to why employment has been a largely masculine pursuit. Examining the male-to-male bond of workplace activities against the hunting pack mentality of many of the Western cultures that have become incorporated, the author believes that only a major social upheaval, accompanied by significant genetic transformations, would remove this. Actual hunting is examined and used as a segue into gambling, the largely bipolar occupation of the elite and the proletariat, but not the working class. This incorporates the need for rigid social rules and structures, but still meets the desire for that adrenaline rush, that reward, and that risk. After this, the author discusses why we might heat and cook food as is done. The answer they concluded is the need to satisfy the ape ancestor and not the predator. Therefore, food is heated and flavored. The topic of diet is discussed, and the use of intensive cropping for limited grain and the consequential effects on society are discussed. This would be exemplified by the modern culture of rice, and the more recent golden rice. The former has little to no vitamin A, which is needed for sight. The latter has been genetically fortified with vitamin A genes. This is a problem predicted decades before it became truly pronounced. At the same time, the author explores the opinions of vegetarians. Recent work has demonstrated the flaws of this particular diet, and they are the same issues the author states. It's the quantity, the quality, and the timely supply of these foods. Opening the chapter on comfort, the author places its importance in the context of grooming. The author takes quite some time to reach the crux of this chapter, and that is the role of communication. Comfort equating to communication. The first being informative, the second mood, and the third exploratory kinds of communication. These three modes of conversation existing to increase cooperation and dependency. The fourth kind of talking is grooming talk, the social white noise, a lubricant in daily activities. The author proposes that the social talking is required to substitute for the grooming behavior of other apes, as the physical contact that the behavior entails is too sexually loaded. This leads on to the taboo avoidance of medical professionals and services, hence the social distance and separation. However, the author attempts to justify the role of medicine as a purely social construct and disease being largely psychosomatic. This chapter ultimately feels flat and lifeless when the evidence is weighed against the facts. There are very few diseases that are psychosomatic. It is doubtful diseases such as HIV, Ebola, influenza, or infections are generated through the mind alone, and that there is indeed a physical factor to them. The author summarizes the role of agricultural and companion animals in this chapter. They begin with domestication, genetic modification of certain species. The domestication of dogs is covered briefly as the one example of companion animals, but it is lacking in details or substance. They then discuss competitive predators and parasites briefly. Then why certain species of anthropomorphic features are seen and favored by the naked ape. The author concludes that it is how closely this species can resemble the naked ape without being a naked ape or a direct competitor. Second, that children favor an animal inverse to their size. The author looks at other reasons for different animals being favored and why there is delineation between the sexes. The author Desmond followed this book with another in 1969 called The Human Zoo, where he examined the contents of the major criticisms so far. The role of the naked ape in a metropolitan city and the city-centered environment. They compare the city lifestyle with that of animals held in a zoo. Overall, the book is a good primer on human behavior presented in a novel way. but it has aged poorly in several areas, while others seem ageless at the moment. Thank you for watching this video. Please post any questions, comments, or suggestions below.